Hi, this is Moyna Bass Fishers. I'm Jim Moyna, and I am going to talk about another big game day decision I made last year that made all the difference in me catching fish. This would have been, and this follows another video I just did on the same topic. I think this kind of advice is actual game day decision making in the moment, in the heat of the battle, decisions that I made that actually were for the better. So, all right, so let's set the stage as to what are the conditions. Where am I at? What are the conditions? I'm at a lake called Serpent Lake in north central Minnesota by Crosby Deerwood of Minnesota. And this lake is what would be typically classified as a mesotrophic lake, meaning it's got moderate fertility. It's got water clarities, maybe 5 feet or so. It's got weed lines down to, gosh, what was it? I want to say like 12 feet, maybe somewhere, maybe slightly more than that, maybe 13, 14 at the most. And the weed types, you had some northern milfoil in there, you had cabbage, you got just kind of a lot of your typical stuff. You don't have a lot of shoreline vegetation. You got a few pads here and there, but not like extensive shallow emergent vegetation. You don't have much of that because most of the lake is shoreline developed, and of course with a lot of shoreline development becomes eradication of a lot of the emergent shoreline vegetation as the landowners and lakeshore owners just rip it out of the lake. So anyhow, so you end up with docks for shallow cover docks, a few pads, and then inside type weed lines, and then you get the outer weed lines and so on. There also are rock piles and gravel bars out in the deeper water, deeper than weed lines, where you find the smallmouth, because there are smallmouth and largemouth in this lake. So this tournament was part of the Champions Tour, which is a weigh, release tournament. So for those of you that don't know, you catch the fish, weigh it right there in the boat, release it right there where you caught it. And you can score as many times as you can all day long with, in this particular tournament, it was a 1 pound minimum for each fish in order for it to be scoreable. So, conditions that day, the weather was sunny, kind of mild. It was kind of mild day. It was September 1st, 2022. Kind of mild, just light winds, just kind of a real nice early September day, really. Very nice. And I mentioned the water clarity was about 5 feet, and I mentioned all that other stuff about the lake, largemouth and smallmouth. So, my strategy going into this tournament, what I discovered and this is something you should take in mind if you're up in this part of the world. On sunny days, for some reason on some of these smallmouth lakes, especially the ones that get a lot of pressure from walleye fishermen, you get a lot of walleye fishing pressure on some of these smallmouth lakes with marginal smallmouth habitat. A lot of times you get walleye anglers fishing a lot of these same rock humps all the time, because walleye fishing pressures greatly outnumbers the number of hours that will be generated on smallmouth pressure. However, the walleyes and smallmouths a lot of times are in the same places on this type of lake. So you do get a lot of fishing pressure on these smallmouths, even though these people might be targeting walleyes instead. And plus, this was a small lake. Gosh, what was it? Maybe like 2,000 acres or so. And it was a small lake, 25 boat tournament. It was a championship tournament. It was the Champion Tour's championship tournament, so they had to limit it to 25 boat field. They put us on a small lake, so with unlimited practice. So all these spots, no, it wasn't completely unlimited, but there was a couple off limits days. But really, these fish got a lot of pressure leading up to the tournament, and you had so these fish seemed to be pretty wary. It was my experience. So in a case where you get wary smallmouth, sometimes that low light condition is the best time to get them, especially at this time of year. When that sun gets high on a pressured smallmouth in our lake, sometimes they just don't want to cooperate at all. So with that in mind, and from what I experienced in my own practice, I did notice this very thing happening. I'm like, the smallmouth bite was better right away in the morning or right at the end of the day, the last hour and a half. So going into this tournament, but they were quality fish. There wasn't a ton of them, but the whole fishery as a general was just kind of just an okay fishery. It's not a great Minnesota bass fishery. It's just kind of an average one with average size fish, not monster population. You're not going to run into a school of 30 of them. You don't have those kind of numbers in this lake. If you run into a school, it's going to be just maybe half a dozen fish or so. Well, I guess some of these places had more fish than that on them, but they're scattered out over the structure, not just clumped on a one cast, one angle, one cast sort of situation. So anyhow, my strategy was, I felt like my best chance to hit these smallies was right away in the morning. I was boat 2 in this tournament, meaning I was the second one to take off. So I basically had several excellent locations to choose from. And I got my prime place that I wanted to fish. And the prime structure was a rock pile. It had smallmouths on it. I caught, I think in practice, I caught like 3 there. But the Lowrance extra target showed me there were several more there. So I knew this was a place where I had a reasonable chance to catch multiple fish. But it was a big enough place also where the fish were going to be spread out around the structure, and being that it was a small lake, even for 25 boats, small lake, that as it turns out I had to share this structure, which was fine. We basically were casting at 2 different groups of fish on the structure, really. But it started out really rough in that I caught one. I caught one right away, so that wasn't rough. But then that's typically what happens on this situation. I've seen this time and time again on this type of a lake and this sort of a situation. First cast through there, you get one. Next cast, you might get another one. But then quickly, the fish spread out. They just get freaky or suspicious or whatever. And after that, you don't catch any. And that's exactly what happened. I caught that one right away on the all-terrain football jig, and no matter how many more times I threw that jig back at those fish, I could see on the active target, they wouldn't bite it. I had several other offerings on my deck. I had little swim baits, medium swim baits. I had Ned rigs. I had just blade baits. I had various offerings on drop shots. These fish would just jerk baits. These fish would just come up, swim up to the stuff, and just look at it, and then peel away. Meanwhile, the guy that was sharing the spot with me, he was having a little better luck, because I was probably there for over an hour fishing these things, in which I told myself I was not going to do that, but I ended up doing it anyways. Because it seems like no matter how long I would sit on fish, once they were exposed to that initial flirt, once I exposed themselves to my presence, they just shut down. But anyways, the other guy, Kyle over there, he managed to catch 3 while I was there. And with these smallmouths, they have kind of a nice average size as compared to largemouths in that lake. So if you could get some nice smallies, the more smallies you could catch, you're going to outdistance largemouth fishermen catching the same number of fish. And Kyle had caught 3, and he caught his on an A-rig. In Minnesota, you can only have 1 hook on your A-rig, which is why I don't like to throw it. But that particular morning, it showed he definitely showed me the value of having an A-rig, because he caught 3, and he caught. Basically, we doubled up. He had one, I had one at the same time. And again, we're not thrown to the same part of the structure. We're maybe a super long cast apart, and he's thrown to a group of fish he's seen on his active target, which is separate from the group of fish or the area that I'm throwing. So anyways, so he's got one and I got one right away. And, but it took him a while to get a second one and took him a while to get a third one. But the A-rig was still able to produce a few more fish. And guess what? That's the bait I didn't have. I didn't have an A-rig. I had a whole bunch of them in my truck sitting at the boat landing. And I made a comment to my marshal. I'm like, well, after Kyle caught his third one, I'm like, you know what? I got a whole bunch of them at my truck at the boat landing. I'm like, it's too late now to even go mess with it because I really felt like it wasn't going to work anyways later in the day, but I might have been wrong on that. So anyhow, I finally give up on that, and I go on that spot. I go to some other smallmouth spots, and it's just a freaking struggle. I mean, I'm constantly seeing fish coming up at my baits and not eating them. I think I caught like a couple just barely scoreable largemouths right on the edge of some weeds. Caught a few others in the weeds, but by the time it was all said and done, we have a 4-hour morning session and a 4-hour afternoon session. After the 4-hour morning session, I had like 7 pounds for the fish I had, which put me, I think I was in 24th place out of 25. Just completely disheartened. I mean, this lake is so much in my wheelhouse, and this is where I'm sitting. It's 24th out of 25. Guys, it's just, I'm so freaking depressed at halftime. And, I mean, the leader had like 30 pounds or 31 pounds, something like that. So I'm really only 24 pounds behind, but on a small lake where every spot had been seen by everybody. I mean, everybody had fished everywhere for the most part, probably. I mean, at this point, you're not going to run into a hot school of fresh fish and dump, 10, 11 fish into the boat just instantly, because there aren't enough fish in the lake typically. Typically, I don't think there's enough fish for you to get like that many fish out of one school in that lake. And it was very unlikely at that point. I think a lot of the stuff had been fished already, and it was just a matter of, in my mind, I had conceded defeat at possibly winning this tournament. So, that's how it's a loser's mentality. Or is it a realistic mentality? But the thing that I wasn't going to do is I wasn't going to just lay over and just say screw it and just do nothing in the second half. I mean, I was going to go out and try to make something, redeem myself to some extent and make a learning experience out of the second half. And that's exactly what I did. So I knew I spent way too much time in deeper water, especially on the smallmouth program. I mean, I fished it all the way for at least probably 2/3 of that period, maybe. And then when I switched to deep weed lines, some largemouth fishing, and that wasn't working very good either. So I decided, okay, this deep bite's not going to get any better. So I'm just going to, I see a lot of guys out fishing deep, okay? So I'm like, okay, the bulk of the field's out deep. Not everybody, the bulk of them. And I don't know where the leaders are fishing. I don't know if they're up shallow or deep. I don't know. But I decide, okay, a lot of the shallow water still available. Not available. It's still, I just felt like there's going to be less pressure on the shallow water in the afternoon. And oftentimes on our lakes in Minnesota, the afternoon shallow bite can really be a good time to be fishing shallow, is in the afternoon. Starting late morning and through the afternoon and evening, that's when our shallow bite can really be hot. Right away in the morning in Minnesota, the shallow bite is sketchy, okay? You might hit a good window on a specific morning, but oftentimes our morning shallow bite is kind of sketchy. So with that in mind, now it's afternoon. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to dedicate shallow. So I just started fishing there's like clumps of matted northern milfoil here and there, and there's and docks, and that's what I'm looking at. And what I like about what I like about fishing this particular cover is the heavy shade. Okay, where I was fishing in the morning, with this clear water clarity, I was fishing the sparse outer edges or even slightly beyond where there's just rock. Well, all those fish get such a good look at my baits and my selections, and there's so much pressure on all these places because there really was. It was just all the prime deep structure had guys on them most of the day. So, with that being said, trying to catch those fish was very difficult. They had my bait's right in the direct sunlight, exposed for any fish to get a good visual on it before they hit it. So my thinking is if I go in the heavy shade, meaning docks or the heaviest weeds, you know, in the mid to shallow range, I'm going to get a better chance of those fish just committing to it. Because in the heavy shade, there's just less light. The fish aren't going to be able to analyze my lure as well, and they're going to more likely try to analyze it with their mouth instead of their eyeballs. Same things with the heavy, shallow cover. A lot of times the fish have to react to get your bite or to get your bait. If they see it, they better get it right this instant. And this is what they're conditioned to. They have to get it right this instant, or they miss the opportunity because the bait disappears into a mass of vegetation, and the bass will never see it again. So fish in heavy weeds, heavy vegetation, they're conditioned to respond instantly or not at all, really. So that's what I'm trying to play off of now, is those two things, is that factor, the reaction factor, and then also the low light factor. So my baits of choice on the dock was just a weightless stickworm on a wacky rig, where you just skip that under the dock, and I caught some of my fish that way in the afternoon. And then when I got in the weeds, in the heavier weeds, I think it was either probably a 3/4, but it might have been a 1 ounce tungsten weight on a Texas rig with a creature style bait rig, Texas rig on that hook. So between those two techniques, and just the good fortune of getting on the right stretches where there were fish in these weeds, there were fish on some of these docks, I actually made the climb from 24th out of 25th places up to 7th place, where I ended up getting a paycheck in this tournament. And it was, it wasn't a first place, it wasn't a second place, but it is a tournament day that I'm very proud of. These are the kind of tournament days I don't necessarily have to get first place to drive away from the boat landing at the end of the day and feel content, feel happy about what I did that day. Sometimes a 7th place is a great feeling, and that's what it was because of how dismally I started in that first half of this tournament. When I made those changes and started catching fish in the second half, and it was a tough bite. And the guys that I kept passing up the ladder were all the guys that stayed out there in the deep water. The guy that won, from what I understand, he caught some of his fish in the similar type grass that I was fishing. Other guys that did well were in the afternoon were fishing more shallow stuff than deep stuff. Although the guy that got second, I think he might have stayed deep all day, perhaps. Not sure, but the guy that got second, I do remember him catching a bunch on the A rig, or claiming to have done such, and he may have caught most of his fish out deep in that tournament. But anyhow, that is my experience, and I'm proud of that experience. Just being able to, and I was lucky that on a pressured lake, I happened to pick an area of the lake where guys hadn't already fished through there. Guys were not fishing through there. And those fish were ready to go. I just, you know, I did miss a few fish in that afternoon session, which really bummed me out because I think I missed like 3 fish or so, and you know, instead of a 7th place finish, I could have been, you know, like uh, easily fifth. 5th place was like 1 fish away, one just decent fish, not a monster, and then 4th place wasn't too far off either, I don't believe. But so I ended up the winners. God, what did the winner have? Like 32 pounds or something like that. Noah Schultz has been an awesome angler up here. He won, and I think I was like 10 pounds back. So I did close. Or does that no 40? Maybe at 40 pounds. Shoot, I don't even know anymore. Um, Anyhow, regardless, I did say 30 pounds was the leader had like 30 pounds after the first. Yeah, so I think it was a. So I must have had like maybe I had around 30 pounds because I remember I was like about 10 pounds back is what I was remember. So I think yeah, I think the lead, like the guy that won had like around 40 pounds, like maybe slightly over, and I might have been 10 pounds back or something to that effect. Holy cow. Feel embarrassed now. The old age. Can't remember. So anyhow, the point is, it was a good finish for me, despite having to dig myself out of, you know, next to last place and find myself all the way up into a check where I actually made money in the tournament. So that was good. Other than that, that's really about it. Other than the last thing I'll say about that tournament is I think that was a tournament where the net flew out of my boat and I had no net for the whole like last 2/3 of the day. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was the one. My net flew out of the boat because we're allowed nets in that tournament. And I think that was it. Anyways, irrelevant to the point of this video. Over.